The gavel in my memory was the last sound I heard before the darkness took me. Not a real gavel, of course, but the metaphorical slam of a life ending in failure, a final judgment on a soul deemed worthless. Now, reborn and trapped in my 16-year-old body, I heard a different sound, the soft, infuriating scrape of a palette knife against canvas. It came from my sister Clara's room, a sound that should have been mine. Peeking through the crack in her door, I saw it, my painting, sunflowers and ash. The very last piece I'd finished in my previous life, hours before the fever finally claimed me. Clara was adding a clumsy, superfluous stroke of black to the corner, her brow furrowed in concentration as if she were the tortured artist who had poured her dying breaths into the composition. My mother stood behind her, a hand on Clara's shoulder, her voice a coo of saccharine praise. "Oh, it's a masterpiece, darling. The judges for the Sterling Grant will be speechless. You've truly captured such profound sadness." My father leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a rare smile gracing his usually indifferent face. "Profound is the word. This will look wonderful on the brochure when you get into Yale. All that money for your art tutors is finally paying off." They were celebrating my soul's work, preparing to trade it for Clara's prestige. They thought the painting was hers. They didn't know it was a ghost's. They didn't know the ghost was standing right outside the door, watching them desecrate her grave. A cold, hard knot of resolve formed in my chest, a feeling I hadn't known in my first fragile life. In that life, I had died of neglect, my lungs filling with fluid while they called me a drama queen for asking to see a doctor. They'd been saving up for Clara's tour of European art museums that summer. A sick daughter was an inconvenience. A dead one was a tragedy they could perform for sympathy. But now, I was back, and this time, there would be no tragic ending. There would only be a reckoning. My first life was a long gray canvas of quiet misery, painted over with the garish, bright colors of my family's preference for Clara. She was the prodigy, the straight A student, the debate team captain destined for greatness. I was the quiet one, the strange one, the girl who found more solace in the whirls of a wood grain or the shifting colors of a sunset than in anything human. My passion was art. It was the only language I felt truly fluent in, the only way I could translate the storm of feelings inside me into something tangible. To my parents, it was less than a hobby. It was a character flaw, a symptom of my failure to be more like Clara. "Stop wasting time with those silly doodles and help your sister with her calculus," my father would say, not even glancing at the charcoal sketch I'd spent hours on. He was an accountant, a man who saw the world in ledgers and balance sheets. My art didn't compute. It was an unquantifiable mess of emotion and color that had no place in his ordered world. My mother's cruelty was more intimate, more precise. She knew exactly where to cut. She would pick up one of my finished watercolors, hold it at arm's length as if it were a soiled rag, and sigh. "Honestly, Alara, what's the point? The lines are all wobbly. Do you see the kind of precision Clara applies to her equations? That's what success looks like. This is a mess." She once accidentally spilled an entire bottle of turpentine over a portfolio I was preparing for a local art fair. "Clumsy me?" she'd chirped while Clara smirked behind her. They didn't want me to have anything that was solely mine, a space where I might outshine their chosen daughter. Financial neglect was their sharpest tool. Clara's every whim was catered to. Private tutors, expensive school trips, a brand new laptop every year. When I timidly asked for a set of professional-grade oil paints for my 15th birthday, my father scoffed. "We're not throwing money away on your little projects, Alara. When you start bringing home grades like your sister, we can talk." I received a book on accounting principles instead. I learned to be resourceful, making my own pigments from crushed flowers and charcoal from the fireplace, using cheap canvases I bought with hoarded lunch money. This scarcity only made my art more desperate, more raw. It was born of longing and neglect, and it held the muted tones of my life. Clara was the most vicious of all because she understood, on some level, what I had. She had the grades, the praise, the perfect life they had built for her, but she had no soul, no spark of creation. She would watch me paint with a venomous envy in her eyes. She'd steal my sketchbooks, then mock my private thoughts and raw concepts in front of her friends. Her greatest triumph was the annual district art competition when I was 17. I had created a piece called Faded Portrait, a study of a girl who was slowly disappearing into the floral wallpaper behind her. It was a cry for help rendered in acrylic. The night before the submission, Clara, with my mother's help, replaced it with a technically perfect but emotionally sterile still life of a bowl of fruit she'd painted in a class. They told me mine had been misplaced. Clara won second place. The judges noted her piece had excellent technique but lacked a certain heart. I remember locking myself in the bathroom, not crying, but feeling a profound and terrifying hollowness. They weren't just ignoring my talent. They were actively trying to erase it, to overwrite my existence with a version they found more palatable. My death 2 years later was as quiet and neglected as my life. It started as a persistent cough, a tightness in my chest. A simple case of walking pneumonia, easily treatable. But a doctor's visit cost money, and a prescription cost more. "You're just being dramatic, Alara. You're always looking for attention," my mother had said, handing me a cough drop. "Clara has her finals coming up. We don't have time for this." They had time to plan Clara's graduation party. They had time to book her celebratory trip to Italy. They did not have time to drive their other daughter to an urgent care clinic. I withered away in my small beige room. My art supplies gathered dust. In my final lucid moments, I was propped up in bed, the television murmuring in the corner. A news segment came on about a young, unknown artist whose work had just sold for a staggering sum at a posthumous auction. The report showed his parents weeping. "We always knew he was a genius," his father choked out. "We supported him in everything." A bitter, rattling laugh escaped my lips. I wondered what my parents would say at my funeral. Would they pretend? Would they fashion a narrative of support for the audience of mourners? My last thought was a desperate, burning wish for a single chance to show them all what they had thrown away. Then, blackness, a cold, silent void. Until it wasn't. I gasped, a shocking, deep intake of air that felt like my first and last breath all at once. My eyes flew open. I wasn't in my sickbed. I was in my childhood room, the one before we'd moved when I was 16. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I was small, my limbs felt different. I scrambled out of bed and stared at my reflection in the mirror. It was my 14-year-old face staring back, unlined by sickness and despair. It was 5 years. I had been given 5 years back. The memories of my first life were not a dream. They were seared into my mind like a brand, a perfect, painful blueprint of the future. I knew which artists would rise, which styles would capture the world's imagination, and which galleries would become the kingmakers. And I knew exactly how my family would betray me, right down to the last callous word. The shock gave way to a chilling calm. This was not a gift of life. It was a gift of revenge. Standing outside Clara's door, hearing them praise my stolen work, I felt none of the helpless rage of my previous life. This time it felt like a confirmation, the first move in a chess game where I already knew every subsequent play. Their greed, their blindness, their pathetic need for Clara to be the star, these were no longer the bars of my cage. They were the tools of my vengeance. I retreated silently to my room, the one they saw as my pathetic little sanctuary. It would become my war room. My plan began to form, not in a flash of anger, but with the slow, meticulous precision of an oil painter laying down a base coat. In my past life, I was a victim because I was powerless and poor, dependent on their scraps of affection and financial support. This time, I would have my own power, my own money. My foreknowledge was the key. The first step was quiet rebellion. I needed capital. There was a national art contest for teens I'd ignored in my first life, deeming myself not good enough. The theme was heritage. I knew from memory that the winning piece was a surprisingly modern, abstract take on a family tree. While I continued to produce the kind of muted, soulful art they expected from me at home, pieces Clara could easily dismiss, I secretly began my real work. I bought supplies with saved lunch money and worked in the dead of the night. my window covered with a black towel. I created a stunning digital collage, a vibrant explosion of interconnected lines and fractals that represented a new kind of ancestry, one of soul and spirit rather than blood. It was bold, futuristic, and exactly what the judges of the near future were looking for. I submitted it online under a pseudonym, Ethel. The name meant noble, a quiet irony that pleased me. Weeks later, a check for $10,000 arrived addressed to Ethel, care of a P.O. box I'd set up. It was more money than I had ever held in my life. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like freedom. This was the seed from which my new life would grow. I hid it away, the first brick in the fortress I was building around myself. Phase 2 was creating the legend of Ethel. Social media was the gallery of the future. I started an anonymous Instagram account. I didn't post the art I made at home, the pieces my family saw and belittled. No, the Ethel account was for the work I was creating with my foreknowledge. I painted in styles that were just on the cusp of exploding into the mainstream art scene. I explored themes of digital loneliness, ecological grief, and post-human identity, topics that I knew would dominate the cultural conversation in 3 to 4 years. My technical skill, honed over a lifetime of obsessive practice, was already there. But now it was married to an uncanny prescience. The account grew slowly, then all at once. A few small art bloggers found me, then a larger online gallery featured one of my pieces. The mystique of the anonymous artist was potent. People speculated wildly about who Ethel could be. Was it a famous artist working under a pseudonym? A recluse? My follower count swelled. I started getting commission requests, small at first, then larger. I funneled all the money into a secret bank account, which I'd been able to open with the prize money and a fake ID I'd painstakingly crafted. I was becoming a ghost in my own home. My real life lived in the shadows and on the screen. At home, I played my part. I was quiet, withdrawn, Alara. I let my grades slip just enough to earn their disappointment, but not enough to trigger a major intervention. I let Clara steal my lesser ideas for her school art projects. I even let her win our arguments. I'd watch her preen when my father praised a charcoal sketch she'd copied from my sketchbook, and I'd feel a cold, satisfying patience settle over me. Let them build her pedestal, I thought. The fall will be that much greater. The most crucial part of my plan was the careful curation of my past life's legacy. I began to recreate, from memory, every single significant painting I had made in my first life. Sunflowers and ash, faded portrait, the series of haunting landscapes I painted during my final illness. I worked on them in a small, leaky storage unit I rented on the other side of town with my Ethel money. It smelled of mildew and dust, but it was my sanctuary. Each brushstroke was an act of reclamation. I was no longer painting them out of despair, but with a chilling sense of purpose. These weren't just paintings, they were evidence. They were time bombs. Alongside the paintings, I kept a journal. In it, I documented every slight, every cruel word, every act of sabotage from my family. I wrote about the turpentine incident, the stolen competition piece, their refusal to get me a doctor. I wrote it all from the perspective of the original Alara, a heartbroken girl who only wanted her family to see her. I filled its pages with despair and longing, a carefully crafted performance of victimhood that was, in its essence, entirely true. This journal, along with the collection of lost paintings, would be my masterpiece. 2 years into my new life, Ethel was a certifiable phenomenon in the online art world. I had a prominent agent who respected my anonymity, communicating only through encrypted emails. We were planning my first solo exhibition in a prestigious New York gallery. The opening was set for the fall of what would have been my 19th year, the year I died. The timing was poetic. Meanwhile, back at home, the final act was about to begin. Clara had been accepted to Yale, largely on the strength of a portfolio filled with watered-down versions of my Ethel style. My parents were insufferably proud. They threw a lavish party where I was expected to act as a waitress, refilling glasses and smiling wanly as guests congratulated my brilliant sister. That night, listening to my father boast about Clara's innate genius, I knew it was time. The next morning, I packed a small bag. In it, I placed a new laptop, my Ethel documents, and a change of clothes. I left my old life behind in my bedroom. The mediocre report cards, the cheap art supplies, the persona of the disappointing daughter. Before I left, I took the key to the storage unit and mailed it, along with an anonymous, typed letter, to a woman named Sarah Jensen. In my past life, Miss Jensen had been my high school art teacher, the only person who had ever told me I had real talent. In this life, I'd followed her career online. She was now a respected art critic and blogger, known for championing underdog artists. My letter told her of a tragic young artist, a girl named Ilara, whose family had suppressed her gift. It spoke of a hidden treasure trove of her work and a journal that told her story. It gave her the address of the storage unit and begged her to bring this poor girl's story to light. Then, I walked out the front door and never looked back. I took a bus to the airport and bought a one-way ticket to New York. Ilara was gone. Ethel was about to be born. The firestorm erupted exactly as I had planned. Sarah Jensen, intrigued by the mysterious letter, went to the storage unit. What she found, she would later write, was the discovery of a generation. My old paintings, the ones born of my first life's suffering, were laid bare under the flickering fluorescent light of the storage unit. Paired with the journal, they told an irresistible story. A genius silenced, a talent crushed by a cruel family. Miss Jensen wrote a blog post that night titled, "The Lost Art of Ilara Vance, a Tragedy of Suburban Cruelty." It went viral overnight. The story was a perfect storm of modern outrage and artistic romance. It was picked up by local news, then national news outlets. My disappearance was treated as a presumed suicide, a tragic end for a tortured artist. Photos of my family were splashed everywhere. My parents and Clara, caught completely off guard, had no choice but to lean into the narrative, but they twisted it to their advantage. They gave a tearful press conference on their manicured lawn. My mother, clutching a handkerchief, wept for the cameras. "We had no idea she was in such pain," she sobbed. "We loved her art. We thought it was a wonderful hobby, but we wanted her to be practical, to be safe. We just didn't understand the depth of her passion." My father, stoic and grave, put his arm around her. "Our daughter was a sensitive soul. We did everything we could to support her. All we have left now are her beautiful paintings." Clara, the picture of grieving sisterhood, added, "I always looked up to her. Her art was so emotional. I just wish I could have told her how much of an inspiration she was to me." It was a masterful performance. They were not the villains of the story. They were the tragic, flawed parents who simply didn't understand their brilliant, troubled daughter. And crucially, as her next of kin, they were the sole heirs to my suddenly priceless estate. The art world, fueled by the tragic backstory, went into a frenzy. Collectors were clamoring for a piece of the story. Sotheby's, the legendary auction house, announced a special one-night-only auction. Ilara Vance, The Lost Works. The hype was unprecedented. Art critics hailed me as a lost master, a suburban Van Gogh. My paintings, once called worthless smudges by my mother, were now being compared to the works of Frida Kahlo and Egon Schiele. The estimated prices were astronomical. From my sleek, minimalist apartment in Soho, which I'd rented under my new legal identity, I watched it all unfold. I saw my parents on talk shows spinning their web of lies. I saw Clara being interviewed for a teen magazine talking about our shared love of art. My agent, the only person in the world who knew the truth, would send me daily updates, his emails vibrating with a mixture of awe and nervous excitement. "They're falling for it, hook, line, and sinker," he wrote. "The stage is set." The night of the auction was a cold, clear evening in Manhattan. I was miles away, sitting in the control room of the New York Gallery, where the first Ethel exhibition was set to secretly open in just a few hours. A massive screen in front of me was live streaming the Sotheby's auction. I had a team with me, a videographer, a tech operator, and my agent, who paced nervously behind me, a phone pressed to his ear. On the screen, I saw the auction hall packed with the wealthiest collectors in the world. And there, in the front row, sat my family. They were dressed in expensive, somber black. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. My father stared straight ahead, his face a mask of solemn importance. Clara sat between them, looking pale and interesting. They looked like a family shattered by grief. I knew they were vibrating with greed. The auction began. The first piece was a small charcoal sketch I'd done of a dead bird when I was 15. My father had threatened to throw it in the fire, calling it morbid. The auctioneer started the bidding at $50,000. My father's jaw went slack. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. A flurry of bids shot the price up. 100,000, 200. It finally sold for $350,000. The room erupted in applause. My family just stared, their masks of grief momentarily forgotten, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. One by one, my paintings were brought out, the physical manifestations of my past life's pain. Each one sparked a bidding war. The Girl with the Tattered Wings, a self-portrait my mother had said made me look demonic, sold for $1.2 million. A series of watercolors I'd painted using cheap student-grade materials I'd hidden under my bed fetched over $2 million. With every slam of the gavel, my parents' weeping became more pronounced. But I could see, even through the camera lens, that their tears were not for their lost daughter. They were tears of ecstasy, of disbelief at the waterfall of money that was about to become theirs. They clutched each other, their bodies shaking with the thrill of it. They were already spending it in their heads, buying their way out of their unremarkable lives. The final piece was brought onto the stage. It was Sunflowers in Ash, the painting Clara had been defacing on the day my new life began. It was considered my magnum opus, the last work of the tragic Alara Vance. The auctioneer's voice was hushed with reverence. "We'll open the bidding at $5 million. The bids came fast and furious. 8 million, 10, 12. My father was openly sobbing now, his face buried in his hands. Clara looked like she was going to faint. The price climbed to a staggering $18 million. The auctioneer raised his gavel. Going once, going twice, and that's when I gave the signal. "Sold!" the auctioneer cried, slamming the gavel down. The room exploded into a standing ovation. But as the applause roared, the massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing close-ups of the artwork, flickered to black. The applause quieted, confusion rippling through the crowd. Then, my face appeared on the screens. Not the face of the sad, lost Alara they'd seen in old photos, but the face I now wore. Confident, poised, with eyes that held no trace of the victim. I was sitting in a bright, modern studio surrounded by vibrant, powerful canvases, the art of Ethel. A microphone amplified my voice through the silent auction hall. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm and clear. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ethel. For those of you who do, well, you know me as Alara Vance." A collective gasp went through the room. The camera feed cut to my family in the front row. Their faces were frozen in utter, horrified disbelief. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost, which, in a way, she had. "I'm not dead," I continued, my eyes fixed on the camera, imagining I was looking right at them. But my family certainly wished I was. Or at least they found me more profitable that way. I started to talk. I told them everything. I laid the unvarnished truth of my first life bare for the world to see. I narrated the stories from the journal, the truth behind each painting. As I spoke, images flashed up on the screen beside me. Scans from my journal, secret audio recordings I'd made of my mother telling me my art was worthless. A video of Clara tracing one of my Ethel sketches and trying to pass it off as her own. "The art you bought tonight is real," I said, my voice hardening. "It was created by a girl who was systematically broken down by the very people who should have protected her. They saw her passion not as a gift, but as a rebellion. They tried to extinguish it. The ultimate irony is that they only succeeded in making her story and her art infinitely more valuable." I let that sink in. The camera zoomed in on my father's face, which was ashen. My mother was shaking her head, whispering, "No, no, no." Clara was staring at the screen, her mouth hanging open, the final dawning horror of utter ruin spreading across her features. "But that money," I said, delivering the final blow, "will never touch their hands. Before I disappeared, I legally signed over the rights and all future proceeds from the estate of Alara Vance to a new foundation I've established, the Ethel Grant for Suppressed Artists. Every penny you spent tonight will go to help young people who, like me, are trapped in homes where their dreams are treated like garbage." I leaned forward, my expression turning to ice. As for you, I said, speaking directly to my family, you wanted the fame. You wanted the money. You wanted the tragedy. You can have the tragedy. The world now knows what you are. Enjoy your legacy. The screen went black. The live stream ended. In the auction hall, there was a moment of stunned silence, followed by an eruption of noise. The camera feed showed security guards moving toward my family, who were now being swarmed by reporters shouting questions. They were trapped, exposed in the brightest of spotlights, their carefully constructed lies reduced to ashes. My revenge was complete. It was not just a victory, it was a public execution of their character. The aftermath was everything I had hoped for and more. My family was destroyed. They became social pariahs overnight, the subjects of global ridicule and contempt. The story of their abuse and audacious fraud was on every news channel for weeks. They were investigated for child abuse and fraud. Though the criminal charges were hard to make stick, the court of public opinion delivered a life sentence. My father lost his job. My mother became a recluse. Clara dropped out of Yale, her name forever synonymous with theft and deceit. They were left with nothing but the crushing weight of their public shame and the knowledge of the nearly $25 million fortune they had held in their hands for a fleeting moment before I snatched it away. As for me, the world was mine. The Ethel exhibit opened that night to a frenzy of media and collectors. The story of Alara Vance and her secret rebirth as Ethel was the stuff of legends. I was no longer an anonymous entity. I was an icon. My art, both as Alara and Ethel, was lauded for its depth, its resilience, and its profound emotional honesty. I was interviewed by every major publication, not as a victim, but as a strategist, a survivor who had orchestrated one of the most brilliant and cathartic acts of artistic revenge the world had ever seen. I am now living a life I couldn't have even dreamed of in my first go-around. I have a beautiful, light-filled studio overlooking the ocean, a place where I can create without fear or apology. The Ethel Grant has already funded dozens of young artists, helping them escape abusive homes and pursue their passions. I receive letters from them every week, letters that speak of hope and second chances. Sometimes, late at night, when the studio is quiet and the only sound is the waves crashing on the shore, I think of my family. I picture them in their too large house, now silent and shadowed, haunted by the ghosts of their greed. They wept at my auction, convinced they were about to become kings. Now, I imagine, they weep for entirely different reasons. They weep for what they lost, for the respect they will never regain, for the daughter whose worth they could only measure in dollars and only recognized when it was far too late. They are a footnote in my story, a dark underpainting that makes the final composition all the brighter. I dip my brush in a vibrant, defiant red, and I paint. I am alive, I'm free, and my work is priceless.